I'm here to report on a homicide by stabbing that occurred on the 2900 block of North 27th Street. The offender in this incident was arrested. On Wednesday, yesterday, at 8:15 p.m., officers assigned to the 39th District responded to the 2900 block of North 27th Street in reference to a disturbance. Fire medical personnel were on location attempting to provide life-saving measures to the victim, who appeared to be stabbed once in the left side of the neck. Medical personnel pronounced the victim deceased at 8:39 p.m. The victim, Dolores Robinson. She was 83 years old. Through our investigation, it was determined that Ms. Robinson was stabbed again once in the left side of the neck and at least 2 lacerations to her face, and she sustained injuries from what we believe to be BB gun pellets to her head and hand. It was also determined that the offender in this incident was Isaiah Rahat. He was the neighbor of Ms. Robinson. Here's what we know. Ms. Robinson was standing on her porch, and at some point she walks into her home. Isaiah exits his home, again, they're neighbors, and follow her inside to her home. While inside Ms. Robinson's house, a struggle ensued. Eventually, they ended up back on Ms. Robinson's porch, where she was fatally stabbed in the neck and shot with a BB gun. Isaiah was charged with murder and related offenses. Now, Mr. Isaiah has 15 priors, and that's where we're at on that. Again, he was arrested and charged for murder.
Were these priors serious enough that this individual maybe should have been in custody at the time of this incident?
Well, we can't determine that through his priors, but his last arrest was in 2023. That's up to the district attorney's office.
Have any charges been filed yet?
Against?
Isaiah?
He has been charged with murder.
2 questions. One, what was he arrested for in 2023?
Well, I won't get into his priors.
Okay. And then another question is, a neighbor who lived near Ms. Robinson said that there may have been some issues with this neighbor and her in the past. Can you confirm that?
Well, we can't determine that through our investigation, but we do believe there was an ongoing issue with this individual in the entire block.
Can you talk about how, and you mentioned district attorney's office, but when there are repeated calls for an individual that's causing problems, what's the most that you can do in a situation like that?
Well, like any call that comes into 911, we respond to the call. If it's a crisis intervention team that's needed, it will be dispatched as well. In this particular case, officers were dispatched to their house prior to this stabbing, and they did what they had to do. They took the report as appropriate.
Do you know what the argument was about?
That I do not know, sir.
Did you all have video that helped piece this together?
That's part of our evidence as well. That helped us drew the conclusion that Mr. Isaiah was, in fact, the offender here.
I know you said you couldn't go into some of the priors, but were they of any sort of violent nature? Were the neighbors aware that this could have been a potentially violent person? Because you also said you can't say what the ongoing issue was. So I'm trying to figure out if the neighbors were aware, like, hey, this is someone we should stay away from, maybe has a prone history to violence, any sort of that indication?
Well, I can't speak for what the neighbors knew about this
Right.
individual.
Well, just based off the priors and based off the ongoing issue, if you can't go into what those were, can you help us piece together, like, did the neighbors have any idea that this was a potentially violent person?
Well, I can say this. They did call a few times on this individual, so they must have knew what type of individual lived on this block. And I will say he was arrested for 3 charges of aggravated assault, 3 cases of aggravated assault.
Did police ever warn the victim that she maybe shouldn't be living at the home or to leave the home? Or hearing that from people?
Not to my knowledge.
I have a couple of questions. Can you spell Isaiah's last name, please?
Sure, it's going to be Rahatt.
And when you say that they've been called to the house prior, were they called to Robinson's house prior for a previous situation regarding Isaiah, or were they called to Isaiah's house regarding other matters?
Got you. I won't be specific on what the calls were, but they were called on the block and at one time to Mr. Isaiah's house.
Okay. Thank you.
Do we think he stabbed her and then shot her with a BB gun, or shot her with a BB gun and then stabbed her? Do we have any indication of how that may have played out?
We don't know which one came first, but we know the fatal wound was the stab wound.
What, can you just repeat what you said? First of all, how old is he?
He is 47 years old.
47. And can you just repeat the part about the BB gun? Can you? He had a BB gun with him, and he shot her harm, can you just explain that part of it?
Sure. So what happens is during some course of this incident on the porch, we know she gets stabbed. She is ultimately transported down to the medical examiner's office, where we discover that there are BB gun pellets in her head and her hand as well.
Can you share anything about maybe has there ever been calls on this neighbor related to maybe like mental health reports or anything like that?
I don't have that information.
It's obviously a really gruesome and tragic incident for the entire neighborhood. Can you elaborate on that at all? They said, by all accounts, this was a sweet individual that they don't believe did anything wrong.
From all accounts, from what we're told, that she seems like a very outstanding individual. Again, she was 83 years old, apparently in good health. This is definitely tragic.
Has the offender been cooperative with police?
To some point, he was cooperative, and then he requested his lawyer.
What can neighbors do in a situation like this? I mean, if the neighbor is causing an issue, but maybe not one that, necessarily brings out police in a certain way or ends up in sort of an arrest or custody. I mean, what can neighbors do? I mean, obviously, this is someone who had issues. This is someone who maybe was prone to violence. You had mentioned aggravated assault. It sounds like they knew there were issues, but what can someone do in this situation? Not everyone can afford to just move away from a problem, some neighbor.
Well, if any neighbor feels unsafe wherever they at, they should call 911. That goes without saying. That's our job, to step in and take the appropriate action when needed. Now, if there's an individual going through some type of crisis, you can also call 911, but you can also call 988, and that's the crisis hotline. And they can send out trained professionals to help mitigate the situation.
How long had Isaiah lived in the neighborhood or next to Robinson?
That I don't know.
And I know you were talking about how this man was, had a history of being dangerous and a nuisance to the neighborhood. And I know the Office of Victim Services has, funds to relocate people after they've witnessed a shooting or a traumatic event. If somebody, is like doing these things habitually on the block, are there similar funds or ways that the PPD can help relocate somebody who might be a burden and they're in danger?
Well, we do have victim assistance officers, and they can reach out to the family. That could be one of the options, but again, I'm not sure if that, in this case, fits this criteria.
How close did he live to Ms. Robinson?
He was a next door neighbor.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. Folks, we'll send out his mugshot once he's been processed.